Hello, everyone. This is Raj Soren, BlackRock Mindset Coach, and we're fortunate enough to have Tracy Clemenson with us today, and she's the founder of Arctic Bee. So, Tracy, tell us a bit about the name. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, so we're a digital marketing agency, and a lot of people ask where the name Arctic Bee comes from. It's actually a symbol of resilience and a symbol of survival and thriving in the face of adversity. So, for my personal journey, I started Arctic Bee during lockdown, and it came on the back of a mental health crisis where I was seriously ill, very depressed, and yeah, I effectively had a breakdown and ended up in hospital. And it was quite a long journey to pull myself out of that and get to the point where I thought you're either going to sink or swim, and decided to set my own company up as a form of therapy. So the Arctic Bee really is about that, about my personal journey, and also about the businesses that we work with. In terms of a lot of the businesses we work with, are small business owners, supporting those through difficult times and sending out the message that you can not only survive in business, but you can actually thrive with the right marketing methods.
That's interesting. I mean, sorry to hear you've experienced that sort of mental abuse and mental health issues. And not many people will actually go and set up a business as a result of that. So I take my hat off to you for doing that. Um,
Thank you.
in terms of the type of business you run and how
Mm.
you managed to get that off the ground, especially going through all the mental health challenges, how difficult was that?
Yeah, it was very difficult. So, when I say that I was ill, I actually had a quite significant suicide attempt, and I was ill. I would say seriously depressed for about 6 months, where um, I slept a lot. I didn't change my clothes for 10 days at a time. I was really um, non-functioning for a large part of that, and lockdown actually was my saving grace, because that mental health crisis happened just before lockdown, and then towards that 6 month period, as we went into lockdown, it almost became easier, because I should explain what led up to that. It wasn't an overnight thing. There were a number of contributing factors. Moving to a city and being very isolated. I'd also had previous domestic violence from some years before that kind of came to the fore, and a very difficult situation in the role that I was in. I was running an alternative provision at the time, and just the stress and the burnout, just as I say, a number of contributory factors that led to that point. And I just got to a point where I felt like I couldn't carry on. So that was a very dark period, and it took a lot to say to myself, and I think anybody who's been in serious depression will probably identify with this, that I had to make a decision. I had to make a decision as to whether I was going to carry on being depressed, and I was going to accept that my life was over, because the thing about having a serious mental health crisis is that when you're in senior leadership and education, you need to be strong. You need to be mentally strong. You need to be on your A game. It's quite an unforgiving profession. So I was facing the end of my career as well, effectively. And, I had to make a decision. And that decision was, well, do something different, actually use it as a form of therapy to build something for yourself. And I had been building websites. I mean, I built my first website in 1999. I Yeah, so I'd always had this a small portfolio of clients on the side of my main career, and I've had quite a varied career as well. I've worked in prisons, in the with helping offenders through the gate and resettle. I've worked in secondary schools. I've worked in further education, so I've had quite a good career. But I've always felt it's good to have a kind of another string to your bow, which is why I always kept this portfolio of web design clients on the side. And thank goodness I did, because it gave me something else that I could do, that that I could build a career on, and or I could build a business on. So I started off by just building the old website here or there. So during that lockdown period, I set myself daily goals. I'd say to myself, you know, today you're going to cook a meal, or today you're going to go for a walk. Today you're going to reach out, see if anybody wants a website, and then that would progress on to building the website. So it was a very, very slow process.
Yes.
And it wasn't actually until May 2021 that I incorporated the company and we officially became Arctic Bee Limited. But I mean, that really was an instrumental part of me pulling myself out of that period of depression and actually giving myself a fighting chance for the future. So yeah, so there was an awful lot to process, an awful lot to go through, and I wouldn't say it's easy. I wouldn't say it's plain sailing.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned about self-care had gone down.
Mm,
10 days you haven't changed clothes.
mm.
Domestic violence going on. Without obviously naming any names, what tended to happen in this situation of domestic violence? What type of things?
Um, so I should say it's not just one relationship. I've had a relationship since actually that has been emotionally abusive. That's a slightly different type of abuse. With physical violence, this was a physically violent relationship. Physical violence and emotional abuse goes hand in hand. You don't have physical violence without emotional abuse, because you get to that point where you feel like you can't escape, you can't get out of that situation. Um, my ex-partner did receive a 5-year prison sentence, which might give you an idea of the level of
I see.
violence that I was subjected to, and I consider myself very lucky to be alive. Um,
Yeah, sorry to hear that. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. I mean,
obviously that's obviously quite serious.
yeah, and it happens. I think it's a lot more common than people think it is, because you don't necessarily see what goes on behind closed doors. And I will say that when this actually happened, there was one attack which lasted. It was a sustained attack which lasted over the course of a day, and I was actually head of education, working with young offenders, a duty governor within a prison. So I was
Mm,
actually height in my career, and nobody had any idea this was going on behind closed doors.
amazing.
It's just going to show you it can happen to anybody, and
Yeah.
as I say, I know it's a lot more common than people think, because I
Mm.
talk about it when I, you know, quite openly. It's surprising the amount of people that actually open up to me and say, "Yeah, I've experienced that as well."
Yeah, there's lots of ways of mental abuse and physical abuse.
Mm.
I mean, are there any sort of triggers or situations that led to this that you can understand?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of people talk about narcissism. A lot of people assume that all abusive people are narcissists. That's not necessarily true. That's a very specific type of abuse. Um, but there are similarities between, because I've been in a relationship with somebody who displays narcissistic traits, and I've been in a relationship with somebody who was physically and emotionally abusive, and there are similarities. And definitely at the beginning of those relationships, there is a love bombing phase where
Mm.
the relationship will move very quickly. You know, if anybody's listening to this and they're looking out for red flags, if somebody tells you they love you within a few weeks, if they're talking about marriage within, you know, a couple of months, if they're saying they want to be with you forever, if they're telling you that they've never met anybody like you, those are probably red flags if things are moving at a faster pace than they normally would.
That's interesting because I do hear of that
Mm,
from other people in their conversations that that does seem very fast to happen. So why do
yeah.
you say that in particular? Because I mean, there's genuine relationships and there's other relationships that stray like this one, with domestic violence. So
Yeah, I mean, there are other red flags to watch out for. So we'll talk about narcissism, and talk about red flags that you might want to look out for in that type of relationship, because actually I think emotional abuse in many respects is worse than physical abuse. It's actually to me, I think it's easier to recover from physical scars than it is to recover from the emotional damage. And I did suffer for quite some time after the physical attack, and I still have problems with my right hand now, actually, from that attack, but I would still say the emotional scars are harder to heal from. um so other red flags to look out for would be, I mean, gaslighting is
mm.
a big
So
thing.
tell me a bit. about gaslighting. It's mentioned
Mm,
in the public press
mm.
and social media. So tell us, what is gaslighting, would you say?
So gaslighting goes back to there was a film um, where a husband tried to convince his wife that she was crazy by turning the gas lights up and down. And essentially, gaslighting is messing with your perception of reality. So there are different forms of it. Um, a big red flag would be where somebody either denies that conversations have taken place. So you remember something being said to you, and then somebody says to you, I didn't say that, or you've misconstrued that, or you've misinterpreted that. That can happen, but when someone's saying that to you frequently and you're thinking, no, you did say that, you start to question what was real and what wasn't. And when that
Yes.
happens a lot, you know, um, projection is a big thing. So blaming the person that you're gaslighting. So, for example, what would be typical of a gaslighter is that if they started an argument, they would then accuse you of starting it. They
Mm-hmm.
might even go as far as saying that you're gaslighting them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Blatant lying to you. So, quite often gaslighting can go with cheating or infidelity, and you might have proof. So, in one particular relationship I had absolute proof this person had cheated on me. It was in black and white, and yet I
Yes.
was told I was exaggerating. I had misinterpreted it. It was just banter. Um, and I was paranoid and I was controlling and jealous and everything. And actually, it did turn out that he was actually cheating.
Mm-hmm.
So
Rather
there
than
is,
manipulate the situation and making you
yeah, yeah,
question yourself, is that what you're saying?
yeah. So you basically question yourself. You're second guessing yourself all the time. Did this person really say this? Did this really happen? Um, am I paranoid? Am I crazy? And that's another thing that's quite common in gaslighting, and that this is a very similar thing between both of those relationships. Is that when you express emotions, if you're angry, if you're hurt, if somebody has been abusive to you, and if you have that natural reaction of saying, "Why have you done this to me? Why have you cheated on me? Why have you hit me? Why did you shut me in a room? Why did you do this?" That person will turn it around as if you're crazy. They'll say, "You've got problems. You need help. You're mentally ill."
Mm-hmm.
And that can be quite extreme because ironically, gaslighting can cause you to have anxiety, it can cause you to have depression, it can cause you to second guess yourself. So while it's messing with you mentally, at the same time, you've got somebody telling you that you need help and you're the problem and it's all your fault.
Mm.
You know,
We know this.
it's
Yes,
yeah,
we know this connection between anxiety, stress, and the physiology, and become burnt out, and individuals can health can deteriorate. So
yeah.
all those issues come about through gaslighting, I suppose, and this other physical and mental abuse.
Yeah, they do. They do. So it's that, convincing you you're the problem, convincing you you're ill, convincing you've got mental problem, using that for justification for the abuse as well. So what was interesting in the physically violent relationship that I was in was that obviously went to a court case, and his defense was that I was toxic, that I had pushed him to that point. Well, nobody ever pushes anybody to the point of violence,
Yes,
you
indeed,
know.
indeed. Yeah, I mean, that must be an obviously extremely stressful time for you. Where did you seek help? Because sometimes in these situations, individuals are isolated and find it difficult to
Mm.
seek help. So, how did you get through that, and who did you approach?
Yeah, that's a good point actually, because isolation is very common as well. So in that particular relationship I'm talking about, what was interesting is that he would cause conflict. So he would cause arguments with everybody around him, and particularly the people that I knew. So we'd cause arguments with my friends. He caused arguments with my children, with my father. Gradually, he was kind of picking people off one by one and isolating me and convincing me that they were a problem. So, your father has a problem with me. You're spending too much time. He was actually jealous of me spending too much time with my children. You're neglecting me. You're not spending enough time with me, causing arguments in the home. And gradually isolated me to the point, in fact, he even tried to get me to give up work. He didn't want me to be working. He wanted me to be at home with him all the time. So
control.
isolation's very common, and it is very much about control, coercion and control. And with that can come financial abuse as well. So restricting your access to money or borrowing money from you, draining you financially. So bit by bit, you'll get yourself into a situation where it almost becomes impossible or impractical to leave. And at the same time, you're convincing yourself that this is going to get better. You're going to be the person that changes them. They're telling you they've never felt like this before. They're telling you you're special. They're telling you they'll do whatever it takes. And then what happens is you end up in the trauma bond, which is where we talked about love bombing. You have the love bombing phase. You fall for that person. The abuse starts off very subtly. It might be put downs about your appearance. It might be put downs about your intellect. It might be put downs about your mental health.
So, I mean, this is obviously repetitive. It happens over a period of time, and sometimes that individual who's doing the abuse, they tend to apologize. And what tends to happen then, because sometimes in that relationship, you think, oh, it's going to improve, but it doesn't improve. So
no, it doesn't. And yeah, it is. It's absolutely, because what happens, I've talked about a trauma bond. What happens is that each time that abuse escalates, so you get the love bombing, and then subtle abuse and put downs, and then an apology. It won't happen again. And then there'll be another love bombing phase, and then there will be more escalated abuse, and then there'll be an apology. And then there'll be another love bombing phase, and then the abuse will be a little bit stronger. And gradually, so in the relationship that I was in, it started off as verbal abuse. It started off as starting to isolate people around me, being jealous of anybody that I spoke to in public, checking my Facebook and commenting on any man that I was connected with, even though a lot of them were work colleagues. That gradual isolation, and then it escalated to whenever we had an argument, he would block me in a room. So he would stand at the doorway, and I would be there for hours trying to get out. As soon as I could get out that space, I'd be able to breathe. And then it escalated to him threatening me with objects. So he threatened me with a hammer at one point. And then it became grabbing my wrist. And then gradually it led up to more physical abuse. So I talk about a trauma bomb because each of those stages, that love bombing phase, reinforces the feelings that you have for that person. So you fall deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until you feel that you're really in love with that person. At the same time, they're manipulating you into feeling that you're not worth any better than them, that you're not going to do any better than to be with this person. They make you emotionally, sometimes financially dependent on them. So actually, leaving becomes very, very difficult, and it can be very, very traumatic to walk away from that. And similarly with narcissistic abuse can be physical, but more often than not, it's emotional. And it's that emotional trauma of, I'm better than you. In fact, what my partner said to me after that breakup was, you're below my ilk. It was a mistake being with you. And that subtle put down would be reinforced all the way through the relationship. You're not attractive enough for me. You're not smart enough for me. You're not. We were in business together at one point. We'd go to meetings, and he would say to me, "You talk too much. It makes you sound stupid. It makes you sound like you don't know what you're talking about." So these subtle put downs are happening all the time.
Just sort of picking them up. You probably don't notice it. Maybe your friends and family notice it. You alluded to the fact that you have children. You had children growing up in this relationship. So how difficult was it for them to cope with this as well, or were they kept shielded from it?
My children were older at the point I went into that relationship. So my children were I think my youngest was 16 and my eldest actually left home. So they weren't growing up in an abusive relationship. In fact, I was married before. My ex-husband and I are still friends for the children, and they are grown up now. They're all in their 30s. So they weren't exposed to it on a day-to-day basis, and growing up with that trauma. But obviously, it was very traumatic for them to see me being
Of course, yeah.
isolated. Yeah, and for my father as well. They had real concerns. And
Mm.
obviously, it's not pleasant for any child to see their mother in the state, because when I was physically beaten up, I was covered in bruises and knife cuts, and
Yeah, it must have been
um,
horrifying for them to see, like I said, their mother in that situation.
yeah.
Now, we know that gaslighting and domestic abuse is
Mm,
highlighted more from the men doing this act. And we have come across stories where it's the other way around.
mm.
Is that something you've come across as well,
Yeah,
where the
yes,
the,
I have.
the
Yeah.
woman is doing the sort of abusing, as it were, for domestic abuse or gaslighting?
Yeah, I mean, the majority of domestic violence victims and the majority of people that are subject to both physical and emotional violence and that get into narcissistic relationships, the majority of victims are women. So it's important to say that and acknowledge that. But yes, there are men that suffer this as well. Um, Generally, I run a website called itsfinished.com, and I have a TikTok channel as well. And I do have a lot of people that direct message me. I do have a lot of people that comment on my social media posts. The vast majority of them, I'd say, are women, but there are men too. And from talking to men that have been through it, in fact, when I was an employer, there was somebody that worked for me, and I spotted there was something not right. I remember having a conversation about this. Is that quite often, because not always, but most men are physically stronger than women.
Yes.
So when they are suffering that abuse, they won't hit back, they won't fight back. And if they did, they'd probably end up in a lot of trouble. They suffer a lot of psychological abuse, and it becomes very, very difficult to break away from it. So there are definitely men that suffer it as well. And I know there are organisations out there specifically that do support men that are going through domestic abuse. So yes, it can happen. It can happen both ways. And that goes back to that point, that when somebody is being abusive to you, quite often they will project and deflect the blame, particularly if they're narcissistic. So with narcissism, narcissists typically it's a very and I should say, I'm not a professional. I only know what I've experienced and I know what I've researched. But with narcissistic personality disorder, the the ego is very fragile. There's quite often, it's another red flag to look out for, is somebody that projects success, wealth. Somebody has a very grandiose sense of self, and actually behind closed doors, they're nothing like that. They may not have any money. Um, they may not have the success that they claim to have. They're projecting something other than what the reality is inside.
I see.
And with that projection comes a real protection of the ego. So a narcissist find it very, very difficult to take accountability and accept that they've done anything wrong. And the easiest thing to do is deflect and actually blame the victim and actually say, well, actually, it's you controlling me, it's you manipulating me. And that happens particularly when you try and set boundaries. So you've been supporting this person all the way through the relationship. They're getting increasingly abusive. You may find out with absolute proof they've been cheating on you, and you try and say no. You try and say, I can't lend you any more money. I can't do this for you. I can't do that for you. And suddenly it becomes, well, you only do things if it benefits you. You're controlling and manipulating me because you're doing things to me on your own terms. Actually, no, what you're actually trying to do is set boundaries. So it can be very complex. And the thing is, if you've been gaslighted through a relationship of any length of time, whether that, 6 months, a year, longer for some people, you do question yourself. You've been conditioned to question everything. You question conversations. You question
Hmm.
what's real. You question, am I really mentally ill? So you also get to the point where you're questioning, actually, am I the problem here? And the one thing I would say to anybody who gets to that point of questioning is go back and look at the proof, because I guarantee there'll be WhatsApp messages, there'll be emails, there'll be text messages. Go back and read it and look at the proof, because quite often gaslighting doesn't just happen verbally face to face. It will happen in those mediums as well.
It's a history of it, isn't it?
Yeah. And when you go back and you look at it in the cold light of day, you can see who's been gaslighting who. So look at the proof, go and get a therapist, talk it through, and unpack it.
So why do you think these individuals have that type of behavior, narcissistic behavior? Is it hereditary? Is it learned behavior? Have they been abused themselves?
That's a very difficult question. I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer that, to be honest. I do know that in the physically violent relationship I was in, so we're not talking about narcissism here, we're talking about physical and emotional abuse. I wouldn't say he was narcissistic. He grew up in a violent household. His father was violent towards his mother. So in that respect, I believe that probably was learned behavior, and I know that those cycles can repeat themselves. There are different thoughts out there about why people become narcissistic. As I say, I'm not really qualified to answer why that might be. But definitely it will go back to some form of childhood trauma or something that happened either with the parent and the child or in their environment as they were growing up. That's forced them to protect their ego effectively.
Yeah. You mentioned seeking help and advice. Is there any agencies that you went to, or charities, or was it NHS you went for help and advice?
Okay, so back in 2014, when I went through the court system, I had support then. I had a NIDSVA that supported me through court. I had witness protection that supported me, and I did seek therapy after that. After my period of depression, it makes me a little bit annoyed actually, because it's a bit of a postcode lottery when it comes to mental health and support. And I love Yorkshire, I love Leeds, I love living here, but I couldn't get the support I needed. So I actually went to stay in London with a friend to seek support and registered GP down there.
Mental health support is quite
yeah. And the support I got in London, the support I got in London was phenomenal. I mean, it was just like a different world really in terms of support. So I got some support down there. I did come back and have some therapy up here, and I do have ongoing therapy because I do find it's quite useful even just to talk things through. I think things always come up. I don't think it ever completely goes away. But ultimately the answer lies in yourself. So when I said about setting Arctic Bee up and going back to that period, pulling myself out of that period of depression, having specialists, having professionals there, maybe there for a guide, maybe there for you to have a look at what the red flags were, how you got into this situation, what need you're trying to fill in yourself in terms of getting involved with that love bombing stage in the first place. That can be very useful. But ultimately, the only person that can do the work to pull yourself out of that period, and the only person that can identify those red flags, and the only person that can walk away from an abusive relationship is yourself. It takes an awful lot of strength. But for anybody who's in any form of abusive relationship, whether it's narcissistic and emotionally abusive, or whether it's physically and emotionally abusive, whatever form of abuse that is, when you're really in love with someone, I understand how painful it is and how difficult it is to walk away, but ultimately only you can make that decision, and it will not get better. You are not going to be the person that is going to change the person you're with. I guarantee if you're in an abusive relationship, other people have also been in an abusive relationship with this person, and when you walk away, there will be somebody next who also ends up in an abusive relationship. You are not going to be the person to change. You can't fundamentally change people. They can only change themselves.
So you mentioned the importance of looking after yourself. You making the decisions and making those brave decisions. So I praise you for getting out of that relationship and having the resilience to pick yourself back up, going through all those real difficult lows in your life, and sort of looking back now, and you've got a successful business which is growing, getting lots of raving fans and clients. How is it that you keep yourself, in good shape now, and in terms of your mental health and your business health?
Well, I'm a real believer in asking for help. So when I set this business up, I mentioned lockdown. I posted on social media. I reached out to people I hadn't spoken to for years to ask if anybody needed a website. And when I'm struggling with things, whether it's my accounts, I've got somebody helping with that at the moment, whether it's my accounts, whether it's something technical, or whether it's something to do with the day-to-day management, I really believe actually that when you're running a business, it can be quite an isolating place. And there are people out there that can support you. You can't do everything yourself. You can't run your own business effectively and be a bookkeeper and a digital marketer and an HR person. There are support mechanisms out there for that. So I'm a real big believer in that. What I've also realize is very important is that if you need to take time out, even if it's just a morning and you want to just go and sit in a coffee shop and have a coffee and read a book, you need to take time out, because if you don't look after yourself, I've got staff, I've got a team. If I don't look after myself and I burn out, it has an impact on everybody. So it is really important to take that time out. And also, it's important to put things in perspective. So having been through two very serious crises in terms of where I thought my life was going to be over, and I'm talking about that period of that incident of domestic violence and my suicide attempt. Both those occasions, I didn't think I was coming out of those situations. It really does put things in perspective. So we have good client retention, we have a good relationship with our customers, but things happen. Sometimes clients decide that they're going to go and do something else and they sell up their business. So it's those things where clients come and go. It's just part of business. You just have to accept it and take it on the chin. It's not the end of the world. Actually, sometimes it's better to just take a step back and say, okay, this is a bad week, this is a bad month, but actually, in the overall scheme of things, as long as you keep your eye on where you're going, where you want to be, things happen, but you need to build that resilience. You need to put it in perspective rather than crumbling every time something goes wrong. And like I say, I think being in those situations has given me that perspective to be able to say, do you know what, this is a bad period of time, but it's not going to last. There is actually better ahead.
Resilience, seeking help, and having a good perspective on life. Whether it's you mentioned something happens wrong with the client, it's not the end of the world, or the website. Now you mentioned TikTok. I mean, what's your channel called there?
It's called itsfinished.com. Yeah. Sorry, it's called itsfinished.com.
How can people get a hold of you? In LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I do have a website which is arcticbee.co.uk, so people can contact me through that, or they can email me at tracy@arcticbee.co.uk. If people want to check itsfinished.com out, if you're going through a relationship breakup, it's not just about abusive relationships, it is actually about the end of a relationship in general. So there's heartbreak support, there's practical support, there's a lot on that website if people want to go and check that out. But yeah, generally, I would say LinkedIn would be a good start if you want to connect with me there, and just pop me a message. And if anybody is local, if anybody's in Leeds or West Yorkshire and they want to come and have a coffee, I'm more than happy to either meet them out and about, or they can come to the office and have a coffee and have a chat.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, Tracy Clemson from Arctic Bee.
Thank you.
An inspiring story, and it's great to know that you picked yourself up and bounced back in a phenomenal way. And able to share your story and hopefully help others out there who are going through difficult times like yourself. So it's really been a pleasure from my end as well, and I'm sure you get a lot of interest. So we'll hopefully see you again sometime. So for those who listen to this program and you like what you hear, do subscribe and share. Thank you very much.